Hi, it's Rich Hoffman here. So we talk about how pop culture is shaped. I think one great example of the mechanisms that are very dangerous come from Robert Heinlein's book, Stranger in a Strange Land, which I've talked about a little bit lately, because if you really want to get back to the root cause of how do people arrive at modern ideas of social understanding, you can look at books like that have spawned a lot of debate over the years. A tremendous amount of debate in this case, because it's one of the foundation books that kind of ushered in the hippie movement. There was a lot of social mechanisms that were occurring at the time that book was written, but Heinlein himself said that it took him about 10 years to write it, and that he spent the world wasn't ready for it, and the social movement was moving in that direction. And in that book, gave him the society needed to be ready for it in his mind. And I would argue, and I know the type because he was an aerospace engineer, and tends to be in the aerospace field. There just are a lot of different people who think a lot of interesting thoughts. And Heinlein, in his trajectory, started off as kind of a socialist, evolved into a libertarian. He certainly, and this is during a time when, the 40s and 50s, there was a wholesomeness that was expected socially, and then there was this undercurrent of ugliness that sort of resided in the background, a depravity that was emerging in a free culture, or that just resides in people to begin with. And how do you socially regulate those dark tendencies, and what mechanism we've come up with in our Christian society that's been very effective in the world has been biblical understanding. And Heinlein was obviously anti-Bible, looking to overthrow the religious order that we came up with institutions to create a polite and just society. He openly, the book Stranger in a Strange Land, I would look at as a mechanism of invention to bring a Martian in from another planet to kind of mirror our own culture and show how ridiculous things he thought culture, especially in America, was. And so he creates a lot of hypotheticals so he could chew them up, spit them out. The danger in something like that is that people who aren't very well-read or understanding biblical concepts, they might carry the Bible around with them, or they see the Bible when they go to a hotel and the New Testament is in the drawer. Whatever those conditions are, they don't typically know the details. So they read a book like what Heinlein wrote, someone like a Charlie Manson, and he was illiterate when he wrote it. They were talking about it in the jail that he was in at the time. That's how I came across this book. And people don't read it for themselves, but they take what Heinlein's opinion is of it and they run with it. And that was certainly a danger that occurred, and it formed Charlie Manson's attitude towards morality and family and structure and all the elements that go into a civil society. And he fancied that he would completely create an upheaval of that social order, and he did that with his own family and the eventual helter-skelter murders. And he's not alone. He ushered in quite an attack on structured society in the 60s, and the book grew in popularity as it fed the flower children movement. There's a lot of danger in these things as they emerge, and how do they emerge in our society, and why they perpetuate the way they do. And I would say that that's a danger of Heinlein's work in a free market where you can voice your opinion, but then that critical analysis then becomes a destructive weapon. And the ideas are then weaponized into the erosion away of the value of what your society is supposed to uphold. And that clearly is the case in Stranger in a Strange Lands. Purposeful dismantling of biblical foundations in civil society. And one of the examples that's most overt was when a character in the book called Jubal. Jubal was such an important character to Charlie Manson that he actually nicknamed his attorney Jubal. So Jubal's a main character in the Stranger in a Strange Lands, and he's contemplating the value of the Bible when he said the morality of biblical understanding was in question because there were the story of Lot, when there was a bunch of people who wanted to have homosexual sex with guests that Lot had, and Lot had sent his daughters out to seduce them in order to protect his guests. And one thing that Jubal never said in the book that Robert Heinlein certainly left out by omission, purposeful omission, was that those guests were the angels sent by God. And Lot did not want to have divine judgment cast upon him, so he put his own daughters out there, which I would never do. But he put his own daughters out to the mob to offer them as an alternative to raping the angels that came to visit Lot, and obviously to take Lot out of Sodom so that they were going to destroy the city, and they were going to take Lot out with him because he was the only just person there was in the city. So the angels came to say, "Hey, Lot, let's go," and the mob gathered outside to rape them. And Heinlein, he purposely knew that if he had scholarship of the Bible, which he obviously did, and he deliberately wrote it in a way that kept the angels out of it. He made it all about the morality of Lot to offer his daughters for appeasement in mass rape for this mob that was out of control and immoral. And he made that as a basic statement of human degradation. And that's important because it's a purposeful attempt to manipulate a public that didn't have very good biblical grasp of understanding those stories, because the Bible's so big and it takes a commitment to get into it and really kind of study and read it at more than a superficial level. And the gamble is that most people just won't do it. They'll read the cliff notes of someone who does, someone like a Robert Heinlein, and then take the words straight out of Jubal's mouth and then use that as a critique against biblical understanding, which then undermines the entire society. Which in the case of this book, it did. It had a gradual impact that eroded away biblical trust and understanding, brought in this hippie movement that was critical of all those traditional elements of foundational society, and we are now dealing with the result of all that. And it's been very destructive. And it's just one example, and you can multiply that out times a lot. There's a lot of people who are fans of the book who then made decisions on whether or not the Ten Commandments should be in courtrooms or in schools, or whether or not we should function in society as a more secular society or as opposed to a more Christian one, because the goal was to undermine the foundations of value that held everything together. And that was purposely done by works of art, like what was done in that book, and the results are what we're seeing today. Multiplying times many, many thousands. It's just one example. It's not that Robert Heinlein, not that he was alone in his task, but he was very purposeful in it. And then you had a publishing industry that blew on the embers and made sure that people in prisons got a hold of this book, and people like Charlie Manson thrived under its manipulations. He learned to read essentially because of that book and its effectiveness and the way the prisoners talked about it. And it shaped his life in a way that created the Manson family, and down to almost every element. By the time you get to the end of Stranger in a Strange Land, the exact way that the lifestyle was from the main characters of the book was exactly the kind of life that Charlie Manson was living with his family ahead of the Helter Skelter murders. And that manipulation came from eroding away the foundation of biblical understanding, which is holding society together. The argument made in the book was that that's foolish and it's immoral, and look what Lot was going to do to his daughters to appease the mob. and it made him a very moral person. And that's your foundation document, which should be rejected with a new morality, which then the hippie movement tried to replace. And then we ended up with the kind of monstrosities that we're dealing with now. And we're trying to figure out how we got here. And I think you have to go back and understand how those monstrosities were created in the first place, which is what I'm interested in. And we have a lot of fixing up to do, but before we can do that, you have to understand how it was untangled to begin with. And the book Stranger in a Strange Land was just one of those elements. And it's only relevant because it created a major mass murder that really rocked the consciousness of the United States. But it also influenced people like Elon Musk and a lot of the tech people, the tech geeks that are part of this new morality of the tech sector that's building AI and many systems of new ways of thinking. Their entry point to a lot of thought processes comes from that book. Bill Gates was heavily influenced by the same book, Stranger in a Strange Land. So when you start thinking about how he arrived at some of the moral conclusions he's made about climate change and COVID policy and where he spends his money and how, when you look at the kind of books that influence them and the intent of the writers behind them, you can start seeing a pattern of how destruction seeps its way through social mechanisms, finds its way through art and into people's private lives, and reshapes the way they think about everything. And it starts with undermining the structure of family security at home, and then your religious understandings of your relationship to the everlasting, which typically the Bible gives people an entry point to that. And when you challenge and strip that value away, now you leave yourself open to be replaced by lesser minds or more malevolent minds that are up to no good. And they had to strip away your value system in order to get access to a morality they could reshape towards their own mechanisms, evil or otherwise. Pretty detrimental stuff. Anyway, it's an interesting thing to think about, and if you want to understand how to fix some of these problems, you got to know who caused them to begin with and why. And that was certainly the case with Robert Heinlein, who wanted very much to destroy the biblical concept that built American society and global value and replace it with this kind of Manson family communism that was the foundation of a lot of his beliefs in the beginning, that formed their way through this story that ended up being very much a dangerous thought process that has influenced a lot of people in the world, and now we have to untangle it. It's quite a ball of yarn to untangle. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.